Hi there, my name is Sue Nelson, and for the next half hour or so we're going to talk about all things food and drink. And I'm joined by my fellow presenter, Ollie Lloyd of Great British Chefs. Hi there, Ollie. We've got a bit of a packed studio. I can hardly get my drink of water in front of me.
I know, it's always good when there's loads of product on the table.
Loads of stuff here. Oh, and stuff I definitely haven't tasted, I know.
No, and it looks pretty weird.
It all looks pretty weird. Our guests, we're not saying you're all pretty weird guests, by the way. Our guests are Trusha Patel of the Spice Sanctuary. Hi, Trusha.
Hi.
We're going to taste some of your stuff later. All lovely spices. I know you like spices, Ollie. And Craig Rose, who describes himself as Dr. Seaweed.
Yeah.
Do you do that socially? Or is it just professionally?
Not if I want any friends.
No, I was going to say that could be a bit odd. So I'm going to read you a little story first, though, Ollie. It was something I read in a newspaper, which brings me rather nicely to what Craig's doing. Now, I didn't know this story, but apparently during the Second World War, there was a load of French soldiers moored on the Isle of Wight, little island, as we know,
Yep.
south of
here.
southern coast, yeah. And they were getting pretty sick of English food, particularly, bangers and mash and cabbage and stuff like that. And there was about 300 of them, 300 sailors. And they told this guy, who was the landlord of the local inn, that's their favourite pub, that they could no longer stomach British cuisine, saying that they couldn't fight unless they had garlic. This is true. So Mr. Spidey couldn't find a single bulb on the island, so he contacted the Special Operations Executive at RAF Tangmere in Sussex, and he said that they wouldn't be able to fight unless they got garlic. Honestly, this is true. And these guys there, this special squadron, took the request seriously, and on October the 27th, 1942, Operation Achilles began. And basically, a guy called John Bridger was told that he'd be flying 2 spies, including a couple of double agents, over to France in the centre of the country, and they had to return with 2 sacks of garlic bulbs. This is true.
I understand the need.
Yeah, and so basically they brought all this cargo home, and the garlic found its way to the pub where Mr. Spidey was head of the local gardening club as well, which was pretty handy.
Yep.
And he started cultivating it. And the delighted sailors were then able to reproduce their national dishes. And then, because of that, they took part in raids on the French coast and later on the D-Day landings. And despite the reputation as French cooking stable, Britain now consumes more garlic than the French, and much of it, as a consequence, is produced on the Isle of Wight. Did you know that?
Well, I know
what a great story.
I didn't know the story. I knew that a certain amount of garlic was produced in the Isle of Wight. I think, for me, one of the things that is interesting about garlic in particular is there is such a variety in the quality of garlic. And if you buy, I buy big bulbs of the stuff either from farmers markets or from Natura, and they are just completely different beasts to the kind of rubbish stuff you get for sort of 69p for 3 bulbs. And the flavours are totally different. And I've told you this before, but one of my major obsessions is confit garlic, which is when you... I've managed to train my children, who are only 5 and 2, to enjoy the act of peeling garlic. And the other day we sat down and we literally peeled about 15 bulbs and then confit it, and they thought it was a great activity. So,
I worry about your children.
I do.
When they've been brought up. But seriously, this garlic farm alone now has 50 acres and produces 150 tonnes of garlic a year. And there's even a festival of garlic on the island. So I think it's really interesting that just because of that now the Isle of Wight is the centre of garlic production.
And they're also very good at tomatoes, is the other thing they're really good at. Isle of Wight tomatoes is their other big produce that they look at. It's interesting. I mean, it's funny, a quirk of history changes what is grown in a place.
Yeah.
It would never have been grown there otherwise.
No, I don't think. Now, that leads me rather nicely to Craig, because Craig calls himself Dr. Seaweed, which means he doesn't get invited out to dinner much. But you think that Scottish seaweed is great seaweed, and obviously Japanese are very famous for producing seaweed for food. But you've wandered over to Scotland.
I have.
How did that happen?
So the doctor comes, my background's marine biology. I have a PhD, and hence the doctor. So it's a legit doctor. It's
you
not
actually
sort of
are a
bought
doctor.
on. Yeah,
Respect,
don't
Craig,
show me any
respect.
rashes
Dr.
or anything
Fox
like
or
that.
something.
Not quite.
DJ.
But maybe after this, you never know. So I met some guys who were based up in the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis. They've got a seaweed factory. They harvest the seaweed there, which was going predominantly into agricultural use, animal feed, horticulture. Amazing product for that. And so we started working on food grade production for nutrition, for food, flavour boosting, all sorts of different attributes. And so we've been supplying B2B, business to business, to manufacturers across a wide range of things. We've got a smoked seaweed mayonnaise in M&S, there's seaweed cheeses, there's crackers, soups, all sorts. And then early this year, we launched our own range of finished products under the name of Dr. Seaweed. And based on the premise that seaweed isn't weird, it's wonderful, we came up with the brand name of Weed and Wonderful. So from the B2B to now the consumer side, the whole idea is we're taking a sustainable Scottish resource and putting it in formats that are appealing, that are easy to use, whether you're a manufacturer or whether you're a consumer.
So what's so good about seaweed health-wise?
So from a health point of view, there's about 10,000 different species of seaweed, so it's a really broad term. But the one that we particularly focus on is a really good natural and vegan source of iodine. So the majority of women, particularly in the UK, have got diets insufficient in iodine. The only other natural sources are fish and dairy, and they're on the decline.
And if you're vegan, that's difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you're vegan, you won't get it. So really, seaweed's the only natural vegan source. So we measure, because we're the manufacturers, we measure every single batch for all the heavy metals, all the microbial, all the safe stuff. And we're measuring for iodine every batch. And we're doing a lot of research on that.
So can you just wander along the coast and just shove some in your bag, or do you have to be?
You can.
Is there lots of varieties? And you have to know what you're doing, a bit like mushrooms.
Absolutely. No seaweed is in itself toxic or poisonous, but you need to know where you're getting it from. So because if the waters are polluted, then the seaweed will be. So you're allowed to forage. You can go out and get it. But even still, there are lots of foragers, and it's a big trend, whether it's mushrooms or seaweed or anything else. But for most people, you wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm not ready for a sort of slab of seaweed on my plate.
I'm not sure I am either.
Exactly. So we've put it into oil. So our infused oils, we've got 3 different infused oils. We've got a pure seaweed one, a smoked seaweed infused oil, and an intense smoked culinary essence. And these are about taking the culinary benefits of seaweed, the umami effects of seaweed, and putting it in formats that are really easy to use. Everyone knows what to do with an oil.
Should we have a taste of that, actually?
Yeah, definitely.
So obviously I use oil a lot, I'm sure you do, but what's the very specific flavour of seaweed? Or is there as many flavours as there are seaweed?
Pretty much. So umami is a term that I think is becoming more, you guys obviously know, but people are more and more aware of it. It's this sort of natural flavour boosting. So a lot of people aren't aware that MSG, monosodium glutamate, that does get a bad name, but it was originally derived from seaweeds. So in Asian cuisine, they've used seaweed a lot in broths and stews as that flavour boosting. So it's the same principle. So if you give that a shake.
Oh, sorry.
We're looking at these rather sort of tall and lovely bottles for the sort of smoked Scottish seaweed infused rapeseed oil being very trendy. There is inside it some bits of seaweed. Is that for visual effect?
So the pure seaweed oil, when you shake it up, the green flecks come out, and that is the seaweed, and it gives a really nice flavour, and it's lovely over salads. In the smoked one, the big bits you see, that's for visual effect, but that's the actual seaweed which is used.
But the flavouring,
giving that more of a shake now, Ollie.
But the flavouring of that, of the one that has the flecks in it, the oil is flavoured already.
Yeah.
The seaweed there is an additional element.
Exactly.
Fine.
Yeah.
It's interesting because
I got some bread. I can just.
Yeah. Absolutely.
One of the things I think is interesting, and I think one sees it more and more in. I think people understand this more and more from a cookie perspective. Is the idea of drizzling something on a dish afterwards, and how that then gives an additional level of a profile. Whether that happens to be Italian cuisine, kind of truffle oil, or whether it's a sort of particular herb. But actually, I think the idea of finishing a dish is becoming a bit more kind of understood.
Absolutely.
As a way of adding additional bit of flavour. Sue is currently eating this. So you're having
I've got a plate here and I've got both.
You got both, just to confuse things.
I'm going to pour a bit more just so you get a bit of the green flecks in there.
Now, the thing that comes across to me is the colour of it is completely see-through, so it's slightly greeny. But often you've got olive oil and very, very, very yellow, or rapeseed oil is very, very yellow.
Well, so I'm told.
Oh, I like that. Smoky one.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
You're often with the smoky ones.
And it's funny you say about the finishing, because the intense one we have, it's in a pipette dropper and it's thicker, and this is exactly for finishing. So it is akin to like a truffle oil type application.
I really like that. He's supposed to speak.
I didn't
Radio.
I didn't get enough of that. That is really nice, because
That is very nice.
I use occasionally, and I've sort of stopped using it, is sometimes liquid smokes that allows you to bring in, smoky flavours into dishes.
Often got a
And I think they're quite, I agree.
That's got a really nice smoke.
These are all, the seaweed is smoked and the oil is smoked, and it's naturally smoked over oak. So it's not a flavouring that's added, it's all naturally
I think
smoked.
you can tell it's naturally smoked, actually. She said, pretending that she knew about food.
I think that's really subtle, the rapeseed.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pure seaweed one is meant to be subtle, because these as well. We have grand plans, but these are introductory products as well. We want the whole concept of not being weird but wonderful is about introducing seaweed to make people accept it and understand that it's an easy and lovely way to include in your diet.
It's good, isn't it? What would you use that for? I think I'd just be really happy with it on some really nice salady stuff.
But I think you can
Like
actually...
tomatoes.
But also, if you're finishing off a soup or you're finishing off a dish where you want to kind of, if you're in the sort of high-end cuisine thing, you'll have droplets of things where you'll get those flavours. I think actually bring in that smoky flavour into a broth, into the sort of tops of stuff, I think would be delicious.
Bit on there. Because, even with the smoked, for example, if you're just cooking some scrambled eggs or something in the oil itself, it brings through that sort of slightly sort of smoked salmon flavour. Very mild, but really nice. It really lifts.
I like this.
Trusha, you're a spice expert. I know I'm asking you to speak with your mouth full, but it's really subtle. I do like the smokiness.
Yeah, I actually really like the essence.
Nice and strong.
Yeah, I get a lot more flavour from that, and I could see so much potential in using that as finishing, and like you said, on eggs or just a little bit.
On
I really
eggs
like
would
that.
be fab.
And as well, because it's all vegan, it's giving a level of flavours that vegans may otherwise struggle to get. That umaminess is something that is often associated with meats and fish. So it's a great flavour to add to vegetables, whether it's barbecued, grilled, anything else.
A great and a great nutritional value as well. So you've got all your a broad range of minerals, vitamins, amino acids, and quite importantly, it's a sustainable resource, environmentally sustainable resource.
So as I say, we focus on one particular species because, and the way it's harvested is very unique. It's harvested on special boats that are a bit like floating lawnmowers. So they're effectively just trimming the very top of the seaweed. So the seaweed might be,
So they're not dredging it, they're just...
No, not at all. It literally is like mowing the lawn.
Doing a little bit of pruning.
Absolutely. And then there's a lot of studies showing that as you sort of trim the seaweed, as you're stressing it, it encourages more
Promotes
growth.
yeah.
And then we won't go back to a site for at least 2 to 4 years. But there's been a lot of studies done on the upper sustainable limit, and there's plenty there.
Yeah, we're hardly Japan on our consumption of seaweed, are we?
No, and
And we've got a fair
one day we'll
coastline
get
in this
there.
country.
Absolutely, and the west coast of Scotland's ideal because it's sea lochs are perfect. 'Cause they're very sheltered, and there's thousands of miles of it. So
It's interesting because it's not, it's just not in the British cuisine at the moment. Seaweed. We're not cooking with it at all. I think even the sort of Japanese dried seaweed that you'll buy in supermarkets is only bought by about 2% of people. These are very, very niche categories. But it's interesting. I suppose in some ways, kale was not heard of.
absolutely,
10 years ago. There were lots of other vegetables that again have emerged. It'd be interesting to see if this does.
But do you think this will be used by people who are familiar with Japanese food, and therefore seaweed for them is not a big leap? Or do you think that seaweed will end up being like kale or something as a thing that's, in inverted commas, not Japanese? I know it's not, but you know what I mean, people's perception.
Yeah, look, we take lots of different ingredients in the UK and, adopt them as our own. And, they might originally be Italian, they might originally be Japanese, they might originally be from all over the world, and we will then make them our own. I think, obviously, the range of products we're looking at here is very much, I think, playing to, I'd call it a modern British style of cuisine, where actually you can play around with this kind of stuff. And I can imagine how, you could absolutely use it.
And we very much play on the Scottish provenance because Scotland has a very good reputation for food and drink and quality and purity. So that's very important. And interesting you mentioned something like kale, because a recent survey showed that 88% of people knew that seaweed was good for them. They didn't necessarily know why, but they knew it was good for them. And the things that were holding them back from buying it was not really knowing what to do, because the sort of Japanese stuff you buy, you really need to know what to do with it. Not seeing appealing product formats. So the idea is what we've launched, as well as our ingredients that we sell to manufacturers, it's all about ease of use and appealing, exciting brands.
So would you decouple yourself from Japanese cuisine or make sure you are associated with Japanese cuisine? Difficult one, that.
I think, as we know, we discussed before, Japanese cuisine is still relatively niche in the UK. It's only cooked by about 4% of people and only 9% of foodies. So I think ultimately there's a broader opportunity.
But if you go into but most sandwich shops now, that they'll have even Tesco's, they'll have a little pretend, sort of sushi thing, which are generally awful. But so there must be people eating it out or on the go, as opposed to doing it at home.
And that's much
quite
bigger.
big.
And that's much bigger. So the consumption of sushi and visiting of Japanese restaurants, I'll call it generally low-end Japanese restaurants, is quite developed in the UK. And as you say quite rightly, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, Waitrose, all of these people will have little snack boxes of sushi. It's not proper sushi, but it's it's.
And are you targeting that market then, Craig?
I'd say we're building on it. The more people know what seaweed is and see it as a positive thing, the better. So we don't want to take on a Japanese market, because we're not a Japanese source, we're not a Japanese focused brand. But the public perception of seaweed, it's great that they know what sushi is, whether it's proper sushi or otherwise. They know there's seaweed in it. And in some ways, we're sort of, even if people say, seaweed, that's disgusting, why would I want to eat that? At least they know what it is, and then we're engaged.
And they know it's edible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then through the branding, through the messaging and the education we're doing, and all the research we do on the nutrition as well, they're starting to understand more and more. So that's our job, is to educate and intrigue.
So at the moment you've got these lovely rapeseed oils. You've got some, are these sort of like, are they tablets, capsules?
Yeah, so these are pure seaweed capsules, so in a blister pack. So that they're there 1 to 2 a day. It's nothing but dried milled seaweed in there. So you get all the benefits. The iodine particularly, so...
You're going to need that, yeah.
You'll be feeling marvellous in about 10 minutes. And there are health claims we can make on there around metabolism, thyroid health, cognitive function, development in children. So it's particularly focusing on women because of this issue we have, particularly in the UK, but generally across the West, it's a growing problem of a diet's insufficiency in iodine.
I'm going to take those home then, Ollie. They're for women, not for you.
Well, they're great for
They're not for everybody, are they?
I feel much better already. I feel much more gender balanced.
It hasn't even hit your stomach yet. So you've got these capsules, you've obviously got the oils. Is there any other sort of products in the pipeline?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of requests for different products, all about ease of use. So it might be, powders for use in smoothies and sort of superfood and inverted commas powders. And there's a whole range. I mean, my struggle is staying focused. We've got to get these out. We're stocked in Plant Organic and Whole Foods and a range of other independents on Amazon, etc. But we've got to get more out there. And we do still have the B2B side of the business, which is much better established. And we have 3, we do they're all called Pure Sea, is the brand. So it's Pure Sea Natural, which is the pure seaweed. And then a smoked version.
Oh, let's have a look at these. These look like people
Powders.
on drugs.
Yeah, well, wait till you see the middle one.
Oh my God, that looks a bit suspicious.
So
I can smell that.
Pure sea product, yeah. Fine powder.
So this is fine powder. What would you use this for?
So the
It
natural
looks like
one,
very, very finely milled flour, just slightly, greeny.
absolutely, and that's what's in the
Right.
capsule. So we've got 2 markets. We've got our nutraceutical nutrition market, where it's going into supplements, green blends, etc. And then we've got the food market, which, for example, the smoked seaweed powders going on snack foods, in meats, in M&S mayonnaise, which is wonderful.
It'd be really interesting. This could be used for is sous vide, because one of the challenges around sous vide is that actually, unless you've got a chamber vac, you can't vacuum seal liquids. So putting powders and stuff like this in with,
Hadn't thought of that.
meats and stuff.
You put that
Actually,
with salmon.
yeah, you put that with salmon. You put it
Fabulous.
with beef. I mean, you'd get,
Smoked beef.
It works because there you've got the smokiness and the umaminess of the seaweed. It works great with meats and fish. So
That's a top tip, that.
There we go. Powders.
Make it
But I bet that's why
fun.
chefs are probably really interested in this stuff. It's because you're
Absolutely.
trying to bring in interesting flavours and different stuff. And
Absolutely. And chefs are the best. When you go into a big company, when they've got a development chef, it's the best person there because often people will smell a bag of just the seaweed and it
They're
smells
beginning
of
to
seaweed
think,
and they're
yeah.
like, ugh. But when you've got a chef, the brain starts working of how to use it. So an analogy chefs often give is it's a bit like anchovies. So you'll use anchovies as a base for a dish, but you don't get that flavour through. You just get the sort of flavour boosting.
I
and
mean,
the seaweed's
anchovies
the
in
same.
lamb is amazing, but you can't taste it. You just get an
Absolutely.
amazing salt flavour. Same thing
very
here,
similar.
really. Interesting.
very interesting.
I can see a few recipes going on Great British Chef's site.
Yeah, well,
using
we've
these.
done some stuff with seaweed, but it's not. I mean, it's interesting. Obviously the recipes on our site come from Britain's greatest chefs, and we don't see that many recipes naturally appearing from chefs with seaweed. It's just not a kind of a core thing. So it's an interesting space that I don't think yet's been capitalised on.
No, and I think with chefs it's great in that it shows a trend, but like you say, it's a talented chef, and I'm not going to be able to copy that at home. So it's great to watch and it's great to eat, but it's now our products are about saying, this chef's created an amazing dish. With our products, you can do something similar at home, and you can use seaweed in the same way.
So before we go to Trusha and talk about spices, which is not a million miles away from what you're doing, so do you just rock up somewhere in Scotland and do stuff? Or do you have to get permission, or
Yeah,
does somebody own?
basically the Queen.
Oh, is it the Queen?
Yeah, the Crown Estate. So the
So
Queen owns
she owns
the
all the
seabed.
seaweed.
Yeah, Queen owns the
So
seaweed.
she used swans and
The
seaweed.
Queen's
I
own
didn't realise
seaweed.
that.
Yeah, that'd be a good dish actually.
Yeah,
Surely the Duchy of
swans and-
Cornwall should be doing their own branded, seaweed.
Absolutely. We'll work on. Do you know
So you
them?
have to get permission to do that.
Yeah, so the factory have a license, and that's that. It's all carefully monitored in terms of sustainability and quality, etc.
You've taken one of those capsules. How are you feeling now?
Feeling fantastic.
Fantastic. I thought you
I
would.
feel energised.
The wonder
I-
of seaweed.
Yeah. Got a little small green thing going out of my arm. Being like a
Developing
fish
gills.
man. Yeah.
Yes,
That
with your
even
beard's
exists.
going green. Trusha, before we go into your spice sanctuary, what do you think? Is it something you've used at all? Seaweed? I haven't.
I haven't personally used it, but I think I'm a very avid cook, so it would be something that I would definitely try. I have used nori,
Yeah, I've used nori, but that's the only thing.
and I put it into soups and smoothies and try and hide it from my 3-year-old. But yeah, it's definitely something I would use, but I think you're right. I think it needs,
Huge amount of education
Yeah.
behind it, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the health benefits is really going to help, isn't it? That's what you'd.
Definitely, which obviously is a massive trend. I mean, and I think, the whole vegan thing is, again, I mean, it's still niche. It's still very niche. It's more niche than I think people understand. But people are looking to follow more of a plant-based diet and therefore clever ways in which to get big flavours into vegetables. It's difficult from a cooking perspective. So if you can find clever tricks, it's worth doing.
So let's talk about spices.
Yeah.
Now, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there were wars over spices. I mean, literally wars. The spice wars. And pepper and cardamom, all sorts of things were more expensive than gold. And lots of the trade routes, sort of establishing whose land it was fighting over these sorts of things because, they had such a value. And certainly black pepper used to be used as a currency. It was just so valuable. Now, of course, weirdly, I mean, if somebody was from there, from like 300 or 400 years ago, they would be stunned that spices now really are a commodity, I would
They're a
say.
complete commodity.
And I think your research shows that there's something like most people have around 40 spices in their cupboard, probably from about 10 years ago.
Well, foodies certainly have at least 40 spices in their cupboard. I mean, I think a lot of people, look, if you go back into the 1980s, people had dried herbs, maybe dried garlic, and that was kind of it. I mean, if I'm thinking about my father's, spice cabinet from the 1980s, it was probably those two, maybe dried rosemary and dried thyme. I mean, it was pretty traditional European spices. What's extraordinary now is that we've expanded the range. But I think the interesting issue for the spice industry is that it is seen as a commodity. So it's cardamom. It's it's a particular spice.
So it's just something you can get anywhere and it has no value and it's not.
Well,
You need it, but it's not appreciated.
But I don't think people appreciate that there are different grades of
Yeah.
spices, and that fundamentally, when you buy a highly carefully managed and produced product, it is fundamentally different from something that a retailer is selling at the lowest possible price. And the flavour profile will be different.
That hasn't reached spices at all, has it?
Well, I think it doesn't. I mean, we do a lot of work with Schwartz. I mean, they're the largest producers of spice probably in the world. And we'd worked with Bart's in the past. I think both of those brands are trying to challenge that debate within mass market retail, I call it. But I think there is still there's still a lack of understanding about the fact that you can't the stuff is different. But I certainly think what is exciting about the UK spice scene is that people are buying a wider and wider range of spices. Things like za'atar that we didn't have 4 5 years ago probably are now in most foodies kind of cupboards. They kind of understand za'atar and things. So I think there's kind of a growing understanding of the sheer ranges that you can have.
And I think there's a fundamental human need to sort of, I don't know, experiment with flavours and whatever. And I think the problem with human beings is they'll eat something and it'll be the same and the same and the same, thinking, right, I want to make that different now. I don't want to eat the same thing. And therefore spices have always been used to, make food more exciting. I mean, always been used for that. And there's a sort of rubbish sort of, I don't know, myth really that spices were used to hide rotten meat. And that just, fundamentally isn't true. There's no evidence for that, really. And spices have just always been treasured. Always been treasured.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that, particularly when looking at Indian cuisine, the sheer volume of spices that's used. This is one of the challenges, I think. I have big boxes of spice at home, for when we cook Indian food. And, you have your kind of large cardamom sticks. And, you do use a lot of this stuff. And I think that's part of the fun is, you experiment, you try different things and you experiment with different flavourings.
So Trusha obviously loves spices, but she studied law at the University of Manchester and then she became a solicitor and then she was an associate at Credit Suisse and then she went to Canada. So how on earth did you move from that to suddenly thinking I'll do spices?
Well, I was actually working for a Canadian bank in London and I had the opportunity to go to Canada and continue sort of working for them for a little while there. But when I was there, I was so frustrated with the lack of quality and access to really good quality spices. I'm a big, I've already mentioned I'm a big cook. So I thought, I'm going to sort of see if there's
I'll go and do
a niche here that, or a gap that needs to be filled. And I did a lot of research. I traveled, I met farmers and eventually sort of sort out the whole supply chain, made sure that it was organic for purity, but also, as Ollie just mentioned, it's not just about organic. It's about the grades. It's about understanding the fundamental difference between what makes a spice exceptional versus just, regular. From harvesting methods to how they're dried, making sure they're not commercially, the commercial machinery isn't used too much to heat them, preserving the volatile oils, all of those things that nobody really thinks about when they pick up a jar of spice in Sainsbury's.
So if I can just cut across that. So I've got here a little sort of pack, which is an Indian spice blend.
Yes.
And that's got all sorts of stuff. So it's got paprika, coriander, cumin, garlic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on the pack here, it says premium grade.
Yes.
So does that mean that there is different grades, literally, before you even pick stuff?
Yeah.
Because why would that be? Just because it's in better soil or?
It's also, so organic obviously is like the base level in terms of the quality because there aren't any pesticides or chemicals used in the production. But there are certain areas in certain countries that produce really good grades. So, for example, the turmeric is a
Sweet
classic.
delight, I'm looking at.
Oh, you're looking at sweet. Yeah. So the turmeric is a really classic example. The one that we use in all of our blends is an allopaque grade. So it's grown in a certain region in southern India, and it has the highest concentration of curcumin in there, which is gives it that really deep
And
yellow
that's the
golden hue.
health- That's the health benefits.
That
of
has the
curcumin
health
are huge.
benefits, but it also lends itself to not making that turmeric so bitter. Because some people, a lot of people now know, oh, I should have that in my diet, I should drink it more, I should eat it more, but they don't like it. It tastes bitter. It doesn't have a very appealing taste to it. But when you actually have a much better quality, it is a lot more palatable and you can taste the difference. And we actually got a 2-star Great Taste Award for the a.k.a. turmeric this year.
Just
Oh, is that the heat?
Shouldn't have tasted that then.
No, smell it before you taste it.
Oh God,
Is that spicy?
Oh,
Yeah.
Awesome.
But you see, that is the difference. But if it
We've lost
wasn't,
Sue.
water.
It's
Ollie,
interesting.
water.
It's interesting. One of the things, talking about your the sort of the cutting process. I always remember when I was in Sri Lanka, I went to a really lovely tea plantation, and they were growing lemongrass, and they were sourcing the lemongrass for Noma, and the lemongrass was picked only at certain times in the lunar cycle.
Yeah.
It was only the very, very tops of the of the stems that were used, and it is that thing which is, if you take, it's the same with tea. If you pluck specific leaves rather than cutting off entire chunks of bushes, it's the same as the seaweed conversation we had a second ago, which is there are probably good ways of harvesting seaweed and bad ways of harvesting seaweed. It's down to the conversation we had last week about artisanal and craft produce. If you take care in your production processes, you just get better quality products.
So that's
absolutely right.
So that's the premium grade. So,
Yeah.
so your search, in your sort of suite of products, make sure it's premium grade. Then you've got hand harvested.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Just
Again-
because they can pick the quality and leave the other stuff behind, whereas the machine will just.
Yeah, that's right. So
everything up.
it is going back to that same point about artisan versus commercialization. And, some of the spices have to be hand harvested, like vanilla is an example of that. But some of the, when they're mass produced, they're obviously, in order to meet demand, shortcuts are taken. And so when we visited these farmers, we saw them, it's manual labor. The cardamom pods, for example, they have to be picked at the right time, and then they're sorted out, then they're dried. Like it's all a very much a manual process. So it is, spices are not necessarily associated with artisan
But they
production.
Should, sounds like they should be.
But they should be.
You've also got
absolutely.
non-irradiated and non-fumigated.
Yes.
Why have you put that on there?
So I don't think it's so much of an issue in the EU, but definitely in North America, there's a big issue with spices that are imported into North America are typically irradiated because they seem to think that there's
Make it
a
safer
major risk
somehow.
of pathogens, and it's just not necessary. And if you are buying organic, then in many ways that risk goes away anyway. But again, it's just there is no need to over-process basic ingredients that if you're buying it at a really good quality, they shouldn't need
be
any
right, yeah.
interference with. Yeah.
And then you've got non-GMO and no additives.
Yeah.
So in essence, that's your standards that you've set yourself for your
That's correct.
products.
So none of our blends contain any salt or sugar or citric acid or maltodextrin or anything else that,
Gets
some
hidden
blends
in there to make
do.
them last longer.
Yeah. And they don't need it because of the premium quality, the fact that all the blends and all the spices that we source and we actually buy in are bought in very recent harvest. So again, that's, optimizing their freshness. And yeah, they just don't need it. The sumac is another example that we have. A lot of sumac on the market has salt in it to extend its life and for preservative, basically. Ours does not. And again, it won a Great Taste Award. So that's just, that's testament to the fact that
Absolutely.
you don't need half the things that you see. And sadly, I think we're in an age where you do have to read the ingredients, even on things that
You do.
you don't think you should. Like, if you are buying milk, you shouldn't need to read ingredients on that. And people think, oh, I'll buy some cinnamon. Well, or I'll buy a, seasoning blend where you do need to read the ingredients.
Now, I remember for the FoodTalk Awards, we had your smoothie golden milk, which reached the
Yes.
final because it was
Yeah.
so nice. Is that what you've just poured us here?
Yeah, I hope it's still warm.
Okay. So it's a beautiful colour, which turmeric always does give you, doesn't it? That lovely golden colour.
And what is this? This is a spice blend you've given us, but you've mixed it with.
I've mixed it with cashew milk, and it's unsweetened cashew milk, so there's no sweetener in it. The blend is the a.k.a. turmeric. It's 62% of the turmeric in the blend, with black pepper. So we know that the two need to be
you have to have black
used
pepper, otherwise
together.
your turmeric doesn't get absorbed
Yes,
in your
that's
body.
correct.
Is
Yeah,
that
you're
right?
well up on that.
Yes.
And then we've got cardamom and ginger and also some saffron. So the saffron just gives it a little bit of a subtle honey taste to it, and also just
Colour.
lifts that colour as well. Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, it's not as hot as it should be because
Oh,
we've been
sorry.
too busy chatting. We should have
So
had that
that
straight away.
takes me straight back to it. I mean, I lived in Bombay for a long time, and so
Okay.
that takes
Yeah.
me straight, flavour-wise, just straight back to Bombay.
So good for you.
It is. It's really good for you. Yeah. I've heard so many
Are
people.
you in the turmeric consumption
I
group?
am.
Are
I
you?
am actually, yeah.
That we have that slightly yellow glow. No.
Oh,
It's a great
Do
anti-inflammatory.
you genuinely
I
have it
do.
regularly?
I have turmeric every day.
Do you? And how?
So exactly the same as this, actually. But I normally use either hazelnut or almond milk.
And what, you have a shot of it
Unsweetened.
in the morning,
I have it as like I have it like a latte.
and that's
the
your
morning.
morning drink to sort of kickstart the day.
But the one I've
And
got
the
is
gin and tonic in the
very-
evening for sleeping we had from last week.
Yeah,
But
so I do
it's
all the
tough
good.
and
I do all the
exactly.
good stuff in the morning, and it all
Yeah.
goes pear shaped by the evening. But mine's got quite a lot of black pepper in it. It's very spicy in terms of the black pepper, and probably a bit more ginger. This is much smoother in a way. I think I might move on to this though. I like it.
Yeah, you should. Everyone
It's good. If you're going to have a coffee, if you're going to have a milky coffee in the morning, why not have it with a bit of turmeric in it?
So you just add this to your coffee?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. But if you just use turmeric, which you just buy in the supermarket, it will not give you the health benefits because the curcumin will not be at the higher.
No.
Will not
And nobody tells you
Be in
that.
there.
Yeah, that's
No.
it, right? You don't know how long
probably
they've
be
been
about
sitting on the shelf.
5% curcumin in there. Whereas this will be really huge
Yeah.
amounts, won't there?
Well, actually, 5% is really high.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really-
I'm
so
using
this
that
is-
as a thing, but what I'm
yeah,
saying is
yeah,
you'll get a
that's right.
minuscule amount of
Yeah,
curcumin,
that's
which is
right.
actually the health.
Yeah, that's
health
correct.
thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, did you not know that?
I have to say, a lot of
That's
people
why I
have
only look
talked to me about
25.
the turmeric thing, and that's why I look about 75, is I haven't yet embraced the turmeric thing. I've
Is that
embraced
the taste or just generally?
just two small children, life,
Yeah.
craziness.
But
you know.
this, you just literally the one I've got as well. You just put a teaspoon in some hot milk.
Yeah.
Just put hot
And a
milk.
little goes a long way. So that little
Yeah,
tube
fine.
that you've got there, I think it's 35 grams, and it's going to give you about 20 to 30 servings.
Yeah,
So you
probably
don't really
one a
need lot.
month.
Yeah.
That's, buy one of these a month. That's fine.
Oh, yeah.
Very good for you.
I feel better already. I've had seaweed, turmeric. I mean, honestly, I'm like
You'll be
I'm like a new man.
glowing
Yeah.
green onion.
You know, seriously, I'm green and yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Trying
we've
to
got
think what
another
flag
one.
that is.
We've got another one here which I was quite interested in, and this is called Sweet Delight. Now you've said this is a breakfast and baking spice blend. What would you use
Totally
this
get that.
for?
So adding it into porridge first thing in the morning, into your
So you could do
smoothie,
that.
Porridge.
Oh, you
The only
Cereal.
things I hate. It's the only thing I don't eat.
cereal, fruit salad. You can put it into, you can obviously substitute it in for your baking recipes as well. The idea is that the cinnamon, so talking about grades again, it's a true cinnamon, which is
Oh, that
way
smells of cinnamon.
smoother and sweeter than the regular cinnamon that you would get. And that gives a really natural sweetness. So this is a really good way of people who are conscious about reducing sugar intake or not using sweeteners of any kind. This is a really easy way to actually lend flavour
Yes.
and sweetness to your morning routine. So yeah, I add
Birch
into
muesli is what I. Yeah.
Cinnamon's lovely.
yogurt or anything. Ice cream, I put it into like
And
when
a
I'm
little bit of
making
fennel going in
Mm-hmm.
there. Very nice indeed. So, so you can get these in Planet Organic and Partridges in London and other retailers. But if people go on to spicesanctuary.com, I presume they can order it online.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, we're available online on several marketplaces as well. Yeah.
But you don't just do this, do you? You do other products. Is that right? Have I got that right?
No.
Oh, I've got that right. So I was thinking you do other sorts of stuff. It's just these that go into smoothies.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
blends.
So we have. Sorry. Yeah. So the range is 20 products.
That's right.
And so we have the baking, breakfast and beverage range. Then we've got the international ones. So we've got the Indian, Moroccan, Thai, Jamaican, Mexican, and then we have a smoked range. So it seems to be very on trend. Smoked black pepper, smoked cumin, and smoked paprika, and then some unusual ones. So we've got kaffir lime leaves, asafoetida, sumac. Yeah, and so those are the ones.
Massive range.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
20, and it's quite varied, so it should appeal to different people for different uses.
So I would say if you're just used to buying the spices in your supermarket, it might be a good idea to perhaps order a few of these online and just play around with them. We're good at playing around with
Totally.
cooking, aren't we, in the UK?
Totally.
And see
And
what we
taste
do.
the difference and see for yourself.
See for
Yeah.
yourself. See for yourself.
Yeah.
So, Trusha Patel, thank you so much for joining us.
you.
That's spicesanctuary.com. Dr. Seaweed, Craig, did you
Thank
like
you.
any of these? Did
Oh,
you?
I think they're gorgeous. This Sweet Delight is
That sounds
genuinely
lovely, doesn't it?
sweet,
And
but
delightful.
all natural.
And
Yeah,
delightful.
delightful. No,
Well,
it's gorgeous.
Well spotted. We can see why you're a doctor, obviously, Craig. So,
Isn't that what doctors do? They look at things and they tell you what
do
they
the
are.
obvious.
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. So thanks for joining us, Craig Rose. And you can go on to seaweedandco.com and you'll be able to learn all sorts of stuff about the
And
work
buy the
you're doing.
products.
And buy the products online, of course.
Of course.
Online, of course. That's great. And you feel wonderful now, do you?
I'm actually floating. I'm literally. I need to wear some heavy shoes in order to bring myself down at this point in time.
I see. And you should have a yellow glow and a slightly
Absolutely.
seaweedy
If
beard
when you see me
going
next
on.
week and I'm just a bit more bouncy, maybe it's been a week of turmeric and seaweed eating.
There you go.
No gin and tonics.
No gin and tonics, not for this programme today. So you've been listening to the Food Talk Show, and we're syndicated to radio stations across the UK and further afield, as well as being available on Podbean, iTunes, podcast app, and now we're available on Spotify. Thank you to my fellow presenter, Ollie Lloyd at Great British Chefs, who next week is going to be transformed.
Transformed. You won't even
after having-
recognise me.
Exactly. And if you want to recommend any future guests, someone doing something groundbreaking in the food sector, please get in touch with us via Twitter on @FoodTalkShow. Or if you want to listen to any of our hundreds of podcasts, go to foodtalk.co.uk or the utterly brilliant Great British Chefs website. Have a good week. Bye-bye.